Airports were built to move people, yet they often became places where lives collided and truths were exposed. On this particular morning, the terminal buzzed with rolling suitcases, loudspeaker announcements, and the low hum of impatience. Among the travelers stood a black woman named Naomi Carter, her posture straight, her expression tired but composed. She wore a simple coat, carried a modest handbag, and held a boarding pass that meant more to her than anyone around her could imagine. Naomi had learned long ago how to stand calmly in hostile spaces. She had learned how to soften her face without shrinking herself, how to speak clearly without inviting challenge. It was a skill sharpened by years of navigating rooms where she was questioned before she was welcomed. Today, she was flying to Washington for work, another meeting, another responsibility she carried quietly. As Naomi approached the security checkpoint, a uniformed police officer stepped into her path. His name was Officer Mark Reynolds, though she would not learn that until later. His hand lifted slightly, palm outward, a gesture meant to command obedience. His eyes moved over her in quick judgment, lingering longer than necessary. He asked for her identification in a tone that assumed guilt rather than routine. Naomi paused, then handed over her documents without protest. She asked calmly if there was a problem. Officer Reynolds ignored the question. He examined her ID, then her face, then her bag, as though searching for confirmation of a suspicion he could not articulate. Travelers streamed past them, barely glancing, accustomed to scenes like this, trained by repetition to look away. The officer asked Naomi where she was going, why she was traveling, and how long she planned to stay. None of the questions were required. Naomi answered anyway, voice steady, eyes level. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the quiet calculation of how to survive an encounter without escalation. She reminded herself to breathe. Officer Reynolds gestured for her to step aside. Naomi complied, though confusion flickered across her face. She asked again, politely, what the issue was. This time, his response was sharper. He told her to wait and not cause trouble. The words stung, not because they were new, but because they were unnecessary. A few feet away, another officer watched but did not intervene. A TSA agent glanced over, then returned to their screen. Naomi stood alone in a public space, isolated by authority. She adjusted her coat, grounding herself, aware that every movement could be misinterpreted. The officer's voice grew louder as he questioned her again, repeating the same things, pushing for inconsistency where there was none. Naomi finally asked if she was being detained. The question, reasonable and informed, seemed to irritate him. His jaw tightened. He told her to lower her voice, though she had not raised it. People began to notice. A businessman slowed his pace. A family nearby fell silent. Naomi felt eyes on her back, curiosity mixed with judgment. She refused to let it bend her spine. She had nothing to hide, and she would not perform guilt to satisfy someone else's fear. Officer Reynolds muttered something about suspicious behavior and signaled for backup. Another officer approached, this one younger, uncertain. Naomi felt anger rise, hot and justified, but she kept it contained. Anger, she knew, was often used as proof against people like her. She stated clearly that she was a federal employee traveling for official business. She did not say her title yet. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. She simply stated a fact, and the officer laughed dismissively, waving her words away as a lie meant to escape scrutiny. That was when Naomi reached into her bag slowly and removed a badge. She held it out, not dramatically, not triumphantly, just calmly. The letters were unmistakable. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The air shifted instantly. The younger officer froze. The nearby TSA agent looked up sharply. Officer Reynolds stared at the badge, then at Naomi, then back at the badge, as if reality had slipped out of alignment. The confidence drained from his posture, replaced by something close to panic. Naomi watched the change without satisfaction. She had seen it before, that sudden respect that arrived only when power was revealed. She spoke then, her voice firm but controlled. She explained who she was, why she was traveling, and that his actions were being documented. The officer began to stammer, offering explanations that contradicted his earlier certainty. He said he was just doing his job, that security was important, that misunderstandings happened. His tone softened, then cracked. Naomi listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. A supervisor arrived, drawn by the attention and whispers. The situation was explained quickly, though not accurately. Naomi corrected the record with precision, recounting the interaction from the first command to step aside. Her memory was sharp, her words exact. She did not exaggerate. She did not need to. Passengers nearby listened closely now. Phones were raised openly. The story was no longer private. Authority had been challenged not by shouting, but by truth. The supervisor apologized immediately, offering assistance, offering to escort Naomi personally. She declined the escort, accepting only the apology, noting the badge number, and requesting formal documentation. Dr. Reynolds stood silently, eyes fixed on the floor. The weight of his assumptions pressed visibly on him. Naomi felt no desire to humiliate him. Accountability, not revenge, was her purpose. She believed consequences taught more than shame. She was cleared to proceed, her path suddenly unobstructed. As she walked toward the gate, strangers nodded at her, some offering quiet words of support. A woman touched her arm briefly and whispered, "Thank you." Naomi acknowledged them all with a gentle smile, though her heart still pounded. Once seated at her gate, Naomi allowed herself a moment to feel. The exhaustion came first, heavy and familiar. Then sadness, not for herself, but for how predictable the encounter had been. She wondered how many others stood where she had stood, without a badge to change the outcome. News of the incident spread quickly. Videos were uploaded, captions written, opinions formed. The story traveled faster than Naomi's flight. By the time she boarded, messages were already waiting on her phone. Colleagues, supervisors, friends, all reacting with a mix of anger and pride. On the plane, Naomi sat by the window, watching the runway slide past. She reflected on the duality of her existence, respected in conference rooms, questioned in public spaces. She did not resent her badge for granting her safety. She resented a world where it was required. Officer Reynolds was removed from duty pending investigation. Statements were taken. Procedures were reviewed. The department released carefully worded responses. None of it surprised Naomi. She had seen systems protect themselves before. Change, she knew, would require more than apologies. In Washington, Naomi attended her meeting as planned. She spoke about security, bias, and the dangers of unchecked authority. Her words carried new weight, sharpened by experience. The room listened differently now. Lived truth was harder to dismiss than theory. Days later, Naomi received a formal apology letter. She read it once, then set it aside. Apologies mattered, but actions mattered more. She hoped the officers involved would learn something lasting, something uncomfortable but necessary. For Naomi, the incident became another chapter, not a defining moment. She continued her work, continued traveling, continued standing calmly in spaces that tested her resolve. She knew who she was, with or without a badge. Airports remained crowded, officers remained armed, and suspicions still found familiar targets. But somewhere in that terminal, a lesson had been witnessed. Power had been confronted not with violence, but with clarity. Naomi believed that dignity was its own authority, that truth, once spoken, could not be unheard. And as planes lifted into the sky that day, carrying countless unseen stories, she hoped that one officer, one traveler, one observer would remember what they had seen and choose differently next time. Naomi's flight landed just after dusk. The city lights of Washington spread beneath the plane like a web of quiet power. Offices still glowing, decisions still being made long after most people slept. As she stepped into the terminal, her phone buzzed again. This time it was not concern or praise, but a short message from her director asking her to come by the office the next morning. Naomi understood the subtext. What happened at the airport was no longer just personal. It had become institutional. That night, sleep came slowly. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the officer's expression before and after he saw the badge. The contrast disturbed her more than the stop itself. Before, she was a problem to be controlled. After, she was a professional to be respected. The woman had not changed. Only his perception of her power had. In the morning, Naomi dressed carefully, not out of vanity, but intention. She knew appearances mattered in rooms where decisions were justified by optics. At the office, colleagues greeted her with nods that carried weight. Some had read reports, others had watched the video clips circulating online. A few avoided the topic altogether, uncomfortable with how close it hit to truths they preferred abstract. The meeting was longer than scheduled. Naomi was asked to recount the incident again, this time for documentation. She did so precisely, correcting assumptions before they hardened into narrative. She emphasized that she had complied, remained calm, and asked lawful questions. She made it clear that the issue was not one officer, but a mindset that equated blackness with suspicion. Her director listened intently, fingers steepled. When Naomi finished, the room was silent. Finally, he admitted that what unsettled him most was how routine the encounter sounded. Not extreme, not explosive, just familiar. That familiarity, Naomi said, was the problem. Outside the building, protests had begun forming, not violent, not chaotic, but purposeful. Signs referenced the video, the words spoken by the officer, the look on Naomi's face. She watched from a window, feeling the strange distance between symbol and self. She had not intended to become a headliner, yet she understood why people needed one. Officer Reynolds, meanwhile, sat alone in his apartment, staring at his television without seeing it. He had been placed on administrative leave. His badge and weapon were locked away. The silence pressed on him harder than any reprimand. Friends texted cautiously. Family asked what really happened. He told himself the same story at first, that he had followed instinct, that he had been trained to notice threats. But the words sounded thinner each time. He replayed the video he knew was online, though he had not watched it yet. He imagined how it looked from the outside. A uniformed man, blocking a woman's path. His own voice sharper than he remembered. Her calmness, now clearly visible as restraint rather than defiance. The realization unsettled him. At the department, internal affairs conducted interviews. Patterns emerged. Complaints that had been dismissed. Stops that had been justified with vague language. None of it amounted to a single dramatic offense, but together they formed a picture he could no longer deny. His supervisor spoke to him in measured tones, explaining that intent mattered less than impact. Back in Washington, Naomi was invited to speak on a panel about public trust and security. She hesitated before accepting. She did not want her story reduced to a talking point, but she also knew silence allowed others to define the lesson. When she took the stage, she did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She spoke about how authorities should feel to the public, not as fear, but as protection. She spoke about how bias often wore the mask of procedure. She spoke about the danger of assuming that compliance equaled justice. The audience listened, many nodding, some uncomfortable, all engaged. After the panel, a young black woman approached her, eyes bright but cautious. She said she was studying criminal justice and asked how Naomi stayed calm in moments that felt designed to provoke fear. Naomi smiled gently and said calm was not natural. It was practiced. And practice, she said, came from knowing your worth before anyone tried to question it. Weeks passed. The department released its findings. Officer Reynolds was required to undergo retraining and was reassigned away from frontline airport duties. Some called it insufficient. Others called it excessive. Naomi read the report carefully. It was not perfect, but it was documented. That mattered. She received another letter from the department, this one more personal. It acknowledged systemic failures, not just individual error. Naomi placed it beside the first apology, not as closure, but as record. Memory, she believed, was a form of accountability. One afternoon, while boarding another flight, Naomi noticed a change. An officer greeted her politely without suspicion. A TSA agent explained procedures patiently. It was subtle, easy to dismiss as coincidence, but Naomi felt it. The ripple effect was real, even if small. As the plane ascended, Naomi looked out the window, watching the ground fall away. She thought about how many stories unfolded daily without cameras, without badges, without witnesses. She thought about how power revealed character, and how character shaped outcomes. She did not believe one incident could fix a system, but she believed moments mattered. They accumulated. They forced conversations. they left marks. Somewhere else, Officer Reynolds sat in a classroom, listening to instructors talk about implicit bias. At first, his arms were crossed. Slowly, they lowered. He began to recognize himself in the scenarios. It was uncomfortable. Necessary. Naomi never saw him again. She did not need to. Her goal had never been confrontation. It had been recognition of humanity, of truth, of dignity. Airpots remained places of movement and tension, of rules and power. But within them, people carried choices. To pause, to listen, to assume less. Naomi continued traveling, continued working, continued existing fully in spaces that once tried to shrink her. She knew now, more than ever, that calm strength unsettled injustice because it refused to perform the role expected of it. And somewhere between terminals and runways, between authority and accountability, a lesson lingered. Control without respect was weakness, and dignity once claimed could not be confiscated.